If you're thinking about giving up, listen to this story. In the heart of a vast and vibrant forest, Rusty the squirrel lived nestled among the towering trees. With his bright red fur that shimmered like autumn leaves, Rusty was a sight to behold. Despite his vibrant appearance, he harbored a lingering frustration. Known for his quick movements and sharp instincts, Rusty had a trait that often held him back. He was deeply impatient. His impulsive nature frequently led him to start things with enthusiasm, only to abandon them at the first sign of difficulty. Rusty lived in an old oak tree with strong, sprawling branches. From there, he had a perfect view of the forest and its inhabitants. He often watched other animals accomplish what seemed to him like monumental tasks. Birds wove intricate nests, ants carried food tirelessly, and even other squirrels seemed to be masters at gathering acorns and building their homes. Rusty admired them, but with each attempt to replicate their feats, he found himself giving up quickly. The changing season brought a sense of urgency. Autumn leaves painted the forest in hues of orange and gold, signaling that winter was near. The air was crisp, and the wind carried a sense of anticipation as animals prepared for the cold months ahead. Rusty decided that this year would be different. He would finally build the most secure and comfortable nest, one that would withstand the fiercest of winter storms. But even as he began, Rusty's impatience surfaced. Gathering materials like moss, twigs, and leaves was tedious, and the wind often scattered his collection before he could secure them. Frustrated, he would abandon the task, leaving half-finished piles scattered across the forest floor. "Why is this so hard for me?" he wondered aloud, watching other squirrels steadily carry on. Rusty's mind was a whirlwind of self-doubt. "Maybe I'm not cut out for this," he muttered. Still, a tiny flicker of hope remained deep within him. Each evening, as he sat under the moonlit sky, he dreamed of a warm, sturdy nest of his own. But dreams alone, Rusty was beginning to realize, weren't enough to bring his vision to life. With winter fast approaching, Rusty's failure to complete his nest weighed heavily on him. Time was running out, and the forest's lively rustling of preparation only served as a constant reminder of what he had yet to accomplish. Little did he know that the lessons he was about to learn would change his life and his outlook forever. The days grew colder, and the forest buzzed with activity. Every creature seemed to move with purpose. Birds flitted between branches, weaving their nests tighter. Squirrels scampered up and down tree trunks, burying acorns in strategic locations. Even the wind seemed to be in a hurry, rustling leaves and scattering them across the forest floor. But for Rusty, this flurry of preparation was a constant reminder of how far behind he was. Rusty tried to start building his nest several times, but each attempt ended in frustration. His chosen twigs snapped under pressure, the moss he gathered was too damp, and the wind seemed determined to undo his efforts. "Why does this have to be so difficult?" he grumbled, tossing a branch aside in exasperation. Each failure felt like a confirmation of his belief that he simply wasn't good enough. One afternoon, Rusty perched on a branch, watching his neighbor, a gray squirrel named Hazel. Hazel worked steadily, carrying small twigs to her nest. She moved with patience, pausing only to inspect each branch before carefully weaving it into her structure. Despite the wind occasionally dislodging her materials, Hazel didn't seem discouraged. Instead, she simply retrieved the fallen twigs and resumed her work. Rusty's tail flicked in irritation as he watched Hazel make steady progress. "How good does she do it?" he muttered. "She's no faster or stronger than me." But deep down, he knew the answer. Hazel's patience and determination were the keys to her success, qualities Rusty sorely lacked. Feeling restless, Rusty decided to take a break and explore the forest floor. Perhaps a change of scenery would clear his mind. As he wandered, he noticed the industrious ants marching in long lines, carrying pieces of food many times their size. Rusty paused to observe them. Despite obstacles in their path, a fallen leaf, or a gust of wind, they didn't stop. They simply found another way, working as a team to overcome challenges. Even the ants don't give up, Rusty thought, a twinge of shame creeping in, and they're so much smaller than I am. The realization weighed on him, but instead of inspiring action, it deepened his sense of inadequacy. By the time Rusty returned to his tree, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the forest. As night fell, the cold wind howled through the branches, sending shivers down Rusty's spine. His makeshift shelter, a loose bundle of leaves wedged between two branches, offered little protection. Curling up tightly, Rusty tried to sleep, but the sound of the wind and the sight of stars twinkling through gaps in his shelter kept him awake. "I'm running out of time," Rusty whispered to himself. Winter was no longer a distant worry. It was a looming reality. Yet despite his growing fear, he couldn't summon the will to try again. Failure felt inevitable, and the thought of struggling only to fail once more was unbearable. Unbeknownst to Rusty, the struggles ahead would push him to confront his impatience in ways he never imagined. The lessons he avoided were waiting just around the corner, ready to reveal the resilience he didn't yet know he possessed. As the days shortened and the air grew sharper, the forest animals prepared for the oncoming winter with a sense of urgency. But Rusty's attempts to build a proper nest had all but stopped. His pile of half-gathered materials lay scattered at the base of the oak, untouched and forgotten. Every failure felt like a weight pressing down on him, and he couldn't muster the strength to try again. One particularly blustery day, dark clouds rolled in, and a cold rain began to fall. Rusty scrambled to his makeshift shelter, a flimsy collection of leaves that barely clung to the branches. He tucked himself in as tightly as he could, but the wind howled mercilessly, ripping away the fragile walls of his refuge. The rain seeped through his fur, chilling him to the bone. For the first time, Rusty truly felt the gravity of his situation. By nightfall, the storm had worsened. Lightning illuminated the sky, and thunder rumbled through the forest, shaking the very branches Rusty clung to. Unable to stay on his perch, he descended to the forest floor, seeking cover among the roots of a nearby tree. The ground was damp and cold, offering little comfort. Rusty curled up tightly, his small body trembling as he fought to keep warm. "I can't do this," Rusty muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I'm not strong enough, not smart enough." Tears welled up in his eyes, mixing with the rain that soaked his fur. He had never felt so alone. The forest, which had always seemed full of life and possibilities, now felt vast and unforgiving. As the storm raged on, Rusty's thoughts grew darker. Memories of his failed attempts played in his mind like a cruel reminder of his shortcomings. He thought of Hazel with her sturdy nest and the ants tirelessly working despite their size. "They're so much better than me," he whispered. "Why should I even bother trying?" The night dragged on, each passing hour colder and more relentless than the last. Rusty's body ached from the cold, and his spirit felt heavier than ever. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the sound of the storm and the echo of his own doubts. But sleep wouldn't come. Instead, a question lingered in his mind, one he couldn't shake. What if I can't survive the winter? As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the storm finally began to subside. The rain stopped, leaving behind a forest glistening with water droplets. Rusty emerged from his hiding spot, shivering and exhausted. His fur was matted, and his paws felt numb from the cold. For the first time, the weight of his choices hit him fully. He had no shelter, no warmth, and no time left to waste. Looking up at the oak tree, now bare of its leaves, Rusty felt a pang of regret. He had wasted so many days doubting himself, and now he was left with nothing. But deep within that regret, a spark of determination began to flicker. Rusty didn't yet understand it, but this moment of despair was the beginning of a change, a chance to rewrite his story. The morning after the storm, the forest was quiet, almost serene. The sunlight broke through the treetops, casting shimmering patterns on the damp ground. Despite the calm, Rusty felt a gnawing sense of urgency. The chill in the air reminded him that winter was no longer a distant threat. His body, still aching from the cold, urged him to act, but his mind hesitated, trapped in the shadow of past failures. Rusty climbed to a low branch of his oak tree, looking out over the forest. He saw Hazel on a nearby tree, adding the final touches to her nest. Her home looked solid, its walls woven with care and precision. Hazel paused for a moment, adjusting a twig with her small but steady paws, before disappearing into her creation. The sight filled Rusty with a mix of admiration and shame. "I wish I could be like her," he whispered, his tail flicking nervously. "But every time I try, I just make a mess." His gaze shifted to the pile of abandoned materials beneath his tree. They were soaked from the rain, a soggy reminder of his inaction. Rusty sighed, feeling the weight of hopelessness pressing on him once again. Determined to distract himself, Rusty wandered deeper into the forest. As he moved, he noticed something unusual: a small bird struggling with a strand of dried grass. The bird's beak was wrapped tightly around the strand, but the wind kept tugging it away. Rusty stopped, watching as the bird fluttered its wings, holding firm despite the resistance. Over and over, the bird adjusted its grip, trying different angles until it finally managed to secure the grass. Triumphantly, the bird flew to its nest, adding the strand to its growing structure. Rusty blinked, astonished by the bird's persistence. It had faced the same wind and obstacles that often defeated him, yet it never gave up. A thought began to take root in Rusty's mind. Maybe I've been doing this wrong," he murmured. "Maybe failing isn't the end. Maybe it's part of figuring things out." The idea was both humbling and hopeful. For the first time, Rusty considered the possibility that his failures weren't proof of his inadequacy, but rather steps toward success. As he wandered back to his tree, the memory of the bird stayed with him. Rusty sat by his pile of soggy materials, picking up a twig and turning it over in his paws. It was bent, its edges frayed, but it was still usable. He set it aside and picked up another, repeating the process until he had salvaged a small stack of workable branches. The task felt oddly calming, almost meditative. For the first time, Rusty didn't focus on the end result. Instead, he allowed himself to simply work, one twig at a time. The hours slipped by, and as the sun dipped low in the sky, Rusty realized he had completed the base of his nest. It was far from perfect, uneven in places and smaller than he had hoped, but it was a start. Rusty stepped back, his chest swelling with a mix of pride and disbelief. For the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. The bird's determination had shown him a new path, and though the journey ahead would be challenging, Rusty knew he was ready to take the next step. The following morning, Rusty woke to the sound of chattering birds and the soft rustle of leaves. A renewed sense of purpose stirred within him as he climbed to inspect his fledgling nest. Though uneven and modest, it was a physical symbol of his first real effort. For the first time, Rusty felt the satisfaction of progress, however small. As he prepared to continue his work, a rustling noise nearby caught his attention. He turned to see Rowan, an elderly squirrel known throughout the forest for his wisdom and his legendary nest-building skills. Rowan's silvery fur glinted in the sunlight as he approached, his movements deliberate yet graceful. "Morning, Rusty," Rowan greeted, his voice warm and deep. He glanced at the young squirrel's half-built nest and gave a small nod of approval. "Looks like you've been busy." Rusty's ears twitched nervously. I'm trying," he replied, unsure of how his work would be received. "It's not much, though. I've never been good at this." Rowan chuckled softly and climbed onto a branch beside Rusty. "Every master was once a beginner," he said. "The important thing is that you're trying. But tell me, why do you think it's been so hard for you?" Rusty hesitated, unsure how to answer. I guess I just get frustrated, he admitted. When things don't go right, I feel like I'm wasting my time. It's easier to just stop than to keep failing. Rowan's expression softened. Ah, yes, frustration is a powerful thing, he said. But have you ever thought of failure as part of the process? Each mistake teaches you something. If you're willing to learn, he gestured toward his own nest, an intricate structure woven with precision. Do you think I built that in a day? Rusty shook his head, his curiosity growing. How did you learn to build something like that? Rowan smiled. Patience and persistence. I failed more times than I can count. But each failure showed me what not to do. Over time, those lessons added up. He paused, his gaze fixed on Rusty. The secret isn't skill or strength, Rusty. It's perseverance. Keep going, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The words sank deep into Rusty's heart. For so long, he had seen his failures as evidence of his inadequacy. But Rowan's perspective shifted something inside him. What if his setbacks were opportunities, not roadblocks? Encouraged, Rusty spent the rest of the day gathering materials under Rowan's watchful eye. The elder squirrel occasionally offered advice, a suggestion on how to weave twigs more tightly or how to select stronger branches. Each tip made a difference, and slowly, Rusty's nest began to take shape. As the sun set, casting the forest in hues of orange and gold, Rusty stepped back to admire his work. His nest was still unfinished, but it was sturdy and far more refined than anything he had built before. A swell of pride filled his chest. Thank you, Rowan, Rusty said, his voice earnest. I don't think I could have done this without your help. Rowan placed a gentle paw on Rusty's shoulder. You've always had the ability, Rusty. All you needed was a little patience and a reminder to keep trying. You're well on your way now. That night, as Rusty nestled into the beginnings of his new home, he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the twigs and moss surrounding him. For the first time, he believed he could finish what he had started. The next day, Rusty woke with a new determination. The morning air was brisk, carrying the faint scent of pine and the earthy aroma of damp soil. The forest was alive with the sounds of preparation, birds chirping, leaves rustling, and squirrels darting through the treetops. Rusty joined in the flurry of activity, feeling for the first time like he was truly a part of this rhythm of survival. He began his work by sorting the materials he had collected. Rowan's guidance lingered in his mind as he carefully inspected each twig and piece of moss. Instead of rushing, Rusty took his time, weaving the twigs with intention and reinforcing the edges of his nest. Mistakes still happened. A branch snapped here, a piece of moss fell out there. But Rusty no longer saw these as failures. He simply adjusted and tried again. As the hours passed, Rusty realized he was no longer thinking about how far he had to go. Instead, he was focused on the task at hand, losing himself in the steady rhythm of his work. His paws moved with growing confidence, and each addition to the nest brought a sense of accomplishment. At midday, Rusty took a short break, sitting back to admire his progress. His nest was now twice as large as it had been the day before, with sturdy walls and a snug interior. For the first time, it felt like a real home. The realization brought a smile to his face, and for a moment, he allowed himself to bask in the pride of his efforts. But Rusty wasn't alone in noticing his progress. Hazel, the gray squirrel from the neighboring tree, appeared on a branch nearby, her eyes bright with curiosity. "That's quite the nest you're building, Rusty," she said, her voice warm with encouragement. Rusty's ears twitched and he couldn't help but grin. "Thanks, Hazel. It's not done yet, but I'm getting there." Hazel nodded. "I can see that. You've come a long way. What changed?" Rusty hesitated for a moment, thinking back to Rowan's words and the lessons he had learned. "I guess I stopped worrying about getting everything perfect right away," he said. "Now, I just focus on one step at a time. It's not always easy, but it feels worth it." Hazel smiled knowingly. "That's the spirit. Building a nest isn't just about the end result. It's about learning as you go." With her words ringing in his ears, Rusty returned to his work with renewed energy. He climbed higher into the oak tree, searching for the perfect branches to complete his nest. The wind tugged at his fur, and the occasional wobble on the thinner branches tested his balance, but Rusty pressed on. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in a warm, amber glow, Rusty placed the final twig into his nest. He stepped back to take it all in. The nest was sturdy, spacious, and lined with the softest moss he could find. It wasn't just a shelter, it was a testament to his perseverance. Exhausted but exhilarated, Rusty climbed inside and settled down for the night. The walls of the nest shielded him from the cool evening breeze, and for the first time in weeks, he felt completely at peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but as Rusty lay in his new home, gazing out at the starlit sky, he realized that every challenge, every misstep, and every moment of doubt had been worth it. He had proven to himself that persistence could overcome even the toughest obstacles. Winter arrived in full force, blanketing the forest with frost and turning the crisp air icy. The once vibrant treetops were now bare, their branches etched against the pale grey sky. Rusty's sturdy nest, nestled high in the oak tree, stood resilient against the cold winds that howled through the forest. Inside, Rusty felt a warmth that went beyond the twigs and moss. It was the warmth of accomplishment and newfound confidence. Other animals began to notice the change in Rusty. Hazel often stopped by, marveling at the transformation. "You've built one of the strongest nests I've seen," she said one day, her tone filled with genuine admiration. Rusty smiled, but humbly replied, "It wasn't easy. I failed so many times before I got it right. But I learned that persistence makes all the difference." Word of Rusty's journey spread through the forest. Animals who had seen him struggle and falter were inspired by his determination. Even Rowan, the elder squirrel, visited to see the finished nest. As he inspected the structure, he nodded approvingly. "You've done well, Rusty," Rowan said, "but more than the nest itself, it's the lessons you've learned that truly matter." Rusty thought about Rowan's words as he sat in his nest that evening, gazing out at the forest below. He realized how much he had changed, not just in what he had achieved, but in how he viewed himself and his challenges. The doubts that once paralyzed him had been replaced by a quiet confidence. As the days turned to weeks, Rusty's nest became more than just his home. It became a symbol of hope for others. Birds and squirrels alike would stop by, asking Rusty for advice on building their own shelters. Rusty was eager to share his story, always emphasizing the importance of patience and persistence. "Don't give up when things get hard," he would tell them. "Every mistake is a step toward success." One snowy afternoon, a young squirrel approached Rusty. Her fur was fluffed against the cold, and her tiny paws clutched a bundle of twigs. "I've been trying to build a nest," she said, her voice trembling, "but I can't seem to get it right. It keeps falling apart." Rusty climbed down to meet her, his heart warming at the sight of her determination. "I used to feel the same way," he said gently, "but let me show you something." He led her to a branch and demonstrated how to weave twigs together, using the techniques Rowan had taught him. The young squirrel watched intently, her frustration melting into focus. As they worked together, Rusty felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Helping others reminded him of his own journey and how far he had come. By the time they finished, the young squirrel had a sturdy base for her nest, and her face lit up with pride. "Thank you, Rusty," she exclaimed. "I didn't think I could do it." Rusty smiled. "You did most of the work yourself. Just remember, every big success starts with small steps." The winter days passed, and Rusty's nest remained a beacon in the forest. His journey from doubt to determination had not only changed his life, but had also inspired others to believe in their own potential. As he sat in his nest one starry night, surrounded by the quiet beauty of the forest, Rusty reflected on the lessons he had learned. Persistence wasn't just about completing a task. It was about discovering strength within yourself, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. And so, Rusty's story became a lasting reminder to all who heard it. No dream is too big, no challenge too daunting for those who keep trying. Moral of the story: success isn't about never failing. It's about refusing to give up. Inspired by Rusty's journey? Share this story with someone who needs a reminder to keep going. Like and subscribe for more tales of wisdom and hope.